It was here, now, pressing against the boundaries of their school and their lives with increasing intensity. But for the first time since learning of Voldemort's return, Harry felt like they might actually have a chance to win. The Founders had seen this moment coming across centuries of accumulated time. They had planned for it, prepared for it, created weapons and protections and fail-safes that would allow their descendants to fight back against ultimate darkness. And now it fell to a new generation to prove themselves worthy of that legacy. Tomorrow, they would begin the work of claiming the remaining fragments of the Founders' Compact. Tomorrow, they would seek out allies and confront enemies and risk everything for the chance to save their world. Tonight, they would simply hold each other and remember why their world was worth saving. The crystal in Hermione's consciousness pulsed with warm silver light, responding to the love and determination that surrounded it. Somewhere in the magical ether, the shade of Rowena Ravenclaw smiled and prepared to pass her burden to a new generation. The Founders' legacy lived on, and perhaps, just perhaps, that would be enough. Chapter 10. Love and Sacrifice. The wards around Hogwarts screamed. Harry jolted awake in his dormitory bed, his scar burning with a pain so intense it made his vision blur. Around him, his dormmates were stirring uneasily, disturbed by dreams they couldn't quite remember. But Harry knew what had woken them. He could feel it in the magical currents that ran through the castle like blood through veins. Voldemort was coming. He dressed quickly and quietly, slipping out of Gryffindor Tower without waking anyone. The corridors were eerily silent, but he could sense movement throughout the castle. Teachers hurrying to secure vulnerable areas, older students being quietly evacuated, protective enchantments springing to life with the urgent energy of a school preparing for siege. He found Hermione in their sanctuary within the Room of Requirement, standing before a wall covered in maps and tactical diagrams. She was still in her nightgown, her hair wild from sleep, but her eyes burned with the silver fire that meant she was channeling Founder magic. "How long do we have?" he asked without preamble. "Hours," she replied, not turning from the maps. "Maybe less. He's brought everyone, Harry. Every Death Eater, every ally, every dark creature he could gather. This isn't a raid or a test of our defenses. This is the final battle." Harry moved to stand beside her, studying the defensive positions marked on the maps. The teachers? Preparing evacuation routes for the younger students and setting up defensive lines. But Harry... She finally turned to look at him, and he could see fear in her eyes, despite the supernatural calm that Founder magic provided. "They don't know about the compact. They don't know we might have a way to end this that doesn't involve everyone dying in a siege." "Because using the compact might kill you," Harry said quietly. "Because using the compact will almost certainly kill all of us," she corrected. "The magic requires life force, Harry. Not just magical energy, but actual life force. The Founders designed it as the ultimate sacrifice. They knew that defeating absolute evil might require absolute commitment." Harry felt cold spreading through his chest. "Have you told the others?" "I've told them what the magic requires. They've all volunteered anyway." Hermione's voice broke slightly. "Ron said that dying to save everyone was better than living in a world where Voldemort had won. Neville said his parents would understand. Luna said she'd always known she wouldn't live to be old, and this seemed like a good way to make her death meaningful." "And you?" Hermione turned back to the maps, but Harry could see her hands trembling. "I think about my parents, about how proud they were when I got my Hogwarts letter, how they didn't understand magic, but trusted that I was doing something important. I think about all the Muggle-born children who might never get to experience what I've experienced if Voldemort wins this war." "That's not what I asked." She was quiet for a long moment. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "I'm 17 years old, Harry. I want to graduate from Hogwarts and go to university and have a career and marry you and have children and grow old together. I want all of that so desperately it physically hurts." "Then we find another way," Harry said firmly. "We fight him conventionally. With what?" Hermione turned to face him, and Harry could see silver tears on her cheeks. "Harry, he has an army. We have a handful of teachers and some older students. He has decades of experience with dark magic. We have classroom knowledge and good intentions. Even with everything we've learned from the archive, we're not strong enough to face him in direct combat. Then we run. We evacuate everyone and regroup somewhere else. He'll follow us. He'll hunt down every person who ever stood against him, every Muggle-born who represents the world he wants to destroy. Running just prolongs the suffering." Harry reached for her, pulling her into his arms despite the magical energy crackling around her. "I can't lose you, Hermione. I just found you. I can't let you sacrifice yourself for—" "For what?" she asked, pulling back to look at him. "For the chance that thousands of innocent people might get to live? For the possibility that children might grow up in a world without Death Eaters? Harry, if using the compact gives us even a 50% chance of ending this war, how can we not try?" Before Harry could answer, the door to their sanctuary burst open. Ron tumbled through, his red hair disheveled and his face pale with exhaustion. "They're here," he gasped. "Voldemort's army. The outer wards are failing." Luna and Neville appeared behind him, both dressed hastily and carrying bags that Harry suspected contained everything they owned that mattered to them. Luna looked as serene as ever, but Neville's jaw was set with the kind of determination that had carried him through 6 years of being underestimated. "How much time?" Hermione asked. "McGonagall says maybe an hour before the main defensive line is breached," Neville replied. "She's evacuating all students 4th year and below through the flu network in the Great Hall." "And the older students?" "Given the choice to stay and fight or leave with the younger ones," Ron said. "About half chose to stay." Luna drifted over to the wall where they had been mapping out the location of the compact fragments. "We need to decide now," she said quietly, "whether we're going to try to use the Founder's weapon, or whether we're going to fight this battle with conventional magic." The weight of the decision settled over the room like a shroud. Harry looked around at his friends, at Ron, who had overcome his jealousy and insecurity to become one of the bravest people he knew, at Neville, who had grown from a frightened boy into someone who could face down Death Eaters without flinching, at Luna, whose strange wisdom and unshakable faith had carried them through more dark moments than he could count, and at Hermione, brilliant and brave and beautiful, who was prepared to die to save a world that had often treated her as lesser because of her blood status. "If we do this," he said slowly, "if we actually try to use the compact, what exactly does the process involve?" Hermione moved to the central table, where she had laid out the research they'd compiled about the Founder's weapon. "Each representative has to claim their fragment from its hiding place. The trials are designed to test whether we truly embody the values of our chosen house. And if we fail the trials, then the fragments remain sealed, and we face Voldemort with whatever magic we've learned from conventional sources. And if we pass, then we bring the 4 fragments together and activate the compact. The combined magic of the Founders flows through us, giving us access to power that should be sufficient to destroy Voldemort completely." Her voice became very quiet. "But the magic uses our life force as fuel. The more powerful the enemy we're facing, the more life force it requires." "Meaning we might survive if Voldemort is weakened," Neville said slowly. "But if he's at full power, the magic will drain us completely," Luna finished matter-of-factly. "We'll save the world, but we won't be alive to see it." The room fell silent, except for the distant sounds of battle preparation echoing through the castle. Harry could feel the weight of destiny pressing down on them, the knowledge that everything they had worked for, everything they had learned, everything they had sacrificed, had led to this moment. "There's something else," Hermione said quietly. "Something I haven't told you yet." "What?" Harry asked, though he suspected from her expression that he didn't want to know. "The compact doesn't just require our life force, it requires our souls. Using it means becoming part of the Founder's magic permanently, joining them in whatever realm they inhabit now. Even if our bodies somehow survive the process, we wouldn't be entirely human anymore." "Like Dumbledore," Ron said with understanding. "That's what happened to him when he accessed the archive as a young man. He became something more than human, but also something less." Harry felt the last of his hope crumbling. Not only would using the compact potentially kill them, it would transform them into something that could never truly live again. "Why didn't the Founders use it themselves?" he asked. "Why did they hide it away instead of using it against whatever threats they faced?" "Because there was no threat in their time that justified the sacrifice," Hermione replied. "They created the compact as a weapon of last resort, to be used only when the very existence of the magical world was at stake." "And you think this qualifies?" Before Hermione could answer, the building shook around them. Dust rained from the ceiling, and they could hear explosions in the distance as Voldemort's forces tested the castle's defenses. "I think," Hermione said, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them, "that if Voldemort wins tonight, there won't be a magical world left to save." Another explosion, closer this time. The lights in their sanctuary flickered, and Harry could feel the protective wards around their sanctuary wavering under the assault. "We need to decide," Neville said urgently. "If we're going to try to claim the fragments, we need to do it now, before the fighting gets too intense." Harry looked at Hermione, seeing his own conflict reflected in her eyes. She wanted to live just as desperately as he wanted her to live. But she also understood, with the clarity that came from accessing Founder-level wisdom, that some choices transcended personal desire. "Harry," she said softly, moving close enough that only he could hear her words, "I need you to understand something. I'm not choosing to sacrifice myself because I'm noble or brave, or because I think my life is less valuable than others. I'm choosing this because I love you too much to let you live in a world where Voldemort has won." "Hermione." "No, listen." She placed her hands on his chest, over his heart. "If we don't use the compact, if we fight him conventionally and lose, he'll torture you to death. He'll make me watch while he destroys everything and everyone you've ever cared about. He'll turn our world into a nightmare where people like us exist only to suffer for his amusement. And if we use the compact and die in the process, then we die knowing that we saved millions of innocent people from that fate. We die knowing that our love was strong enough to change the world." She smiled through her tears. "Harry, there are worse things than dying for something you believe in." "There's also living for something you believe in," he said desperately. "There's fighting and surviving and building the world we want to see. And if we can't survive the fight?" Harry was quiet for a long moment, listening to the sounds of battle growing closer. "Then we make sure our sacrifice matters." The decision, when it came, felt both inevitable and impossible. They would attempt to claim the fragments of the Founder's compact. They would risk transformation or death for the chance to end the war decisively. They would choose the uncertain hope of ultimate victory over the certain despair of gradual defeat. But before they left their sanctuary, before they faced trials that might strip away their humanity, even if they survived them, Harry needed to tell Hermione something he should have said weeks ago. "I love you," he said, cupping her face in his hands. "Not just because you're brilliant or brave, or because you've awakened magical abilities that make you glow with silver light. I love you because when you laugh at one of my stupid jokes, the sound makes me believe that everything might actually turn out all right. I love you because you make lists for everything, including lists of reasons why making lists is helpful. I love you because you chose to seal away the most important knowledge you'd ever gained rather than risk it being used to hurt people." Hermione was crying freely now, but she was also smiling. "Harry, I love you because you're kind to house elves, and you remember the names of people who think they're forgettable, and you get excited about things like arithmancy equations and library research." He leaned his forehead against hers. "I love you because you're the best person I've ever known. And if we're about to face something that might change or destroy us, I need you to know that loving you has been the best part of my life." She kissed him then, fierce and desperate and full of all the words they didn't have time to say. When they broke apart, both of them were shaking. "I love you too," she whispered. "And Harry, whatever happens in the next few hours, whatever we become or don't become, that's not going to change. Promise me," Harry said urgently, "promise me that if we survive this, if we somehow manage to use the compact and live to tell about it, you'll marry me." Hermione laughed through her tears. "Harry Potter, are you proposing to me in the middle of a war?" "I'm proposing to you because we're in the middle of a war," he corrected. "Because I don't want to waste any more time pretending that we have forever." "Yes," she said simply. "If we survive this, if we're still human enough to have a wedding, if there's still a world left to have it in, yes, I'll marry you." The building shook again, more violently this time. Somewhere in the castle, Harry could hear the sound of stone cracking and protective wards failing. "Time to go," Ron said quietly. "If we're doing this, we need to do it now." They gathered their supplies quickly, the research notes about the trials they would face, emergency healing potions, protective charms they might need. Luna produced a small mirror that she claimed would allow them to communicate with each other, even if they were separated. "Where do we start?" Neville asked. "The trials can be attempted in any order," Hermione replied, "but they have to be completed within a certain time frame of each other. The magic requires synchronization." "Then we split up," Harry decided. "Hermione goes for Ravenclaw's fragment, since she already has the strongest connection. Neville tries for Hufflepuff's, since his family has been guarding it. Ron attempts Gryffindor's, and I'll take Slytherin's." "Wait," Hermione said, frowning. "That's not right. Harry, everything we've learned suggests that you're the one with Gryffindor heritage. Which is exactly why I need to be the one to try for Slytherin's fragment," Harry replied. "Think about it. Salazar's trial tests ambition tempered by wisdom, right? It tests whether someone can desire greatness without being corrupted by that desire. And you think you can pass that test?" "I think I'm the only one of us who's been directly tempted by dark power and turned it down," Harry said quietly. "I've had Voldemort in my head, Hermione. I've felt what it's like to want power for its own sake, and I've chosen to reject that temptation every time." Ron nodded slowly. "That actually makes sense. And I've been studying Gryffindor family magic since we learned about the compact. My family might not have found a blood, but we've been serving Gryffindor values for generations." "Which leaves me with Hufflepuff," Luna said cheerfully. "I do love finding things that are lost." "Luna, you can't," Neville began. "Neville Longbottom," Luna interrupted, her voice taking on a tone of gentle authority that was somehow more compelling than any shout. "Your family has been guarding Helga's fragment for 7 centuries because you were meant to be the one to claim it when the time came. That time is now." As they prepared to leave their sanctuary and face the trials that would determine the fate of the wizarding world, Harry felt a presence at the edge of his consciousness. Not Voldemort this time, but something warmer, more familiar. "Harry?" He turned to find Professor Dumbledore standing in the doorway, looking older and more fragile than Harry had ever seen him. The headmaster's robes were singed, and there was a cut above his left eye that suggested he'd already been in battle. "Professor," Hermione said carefully, "we thought you were coordinating the defense of the castle." "I was," Dumbledore replied, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "But I realized that the most important battle might not be the one being fought in the corridors and courtyards. His gaze swept over their preparation materials, taking in the research notes about founder magic and the maps showing the location of the hidden fragments. Understanding dawned in his ancient blue eyes. "You're going to attempt to activate the Founder's Compact," he said quietly. "You can't stop us," Harry said, his hand moving instinctively toward his wand. "I'm not here to stop you," Dumbledore replied, surprising them all. "I'm here to help." The room fell silent. After everything that had happened between them, after the confrontations and the broken trust and the fundamental disagreements about knowledge and power, this was the last thing any of them had expected. "Why?" Hermione asked. Dumbledore moved to one of the chairs and sat down heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 100+ years. "Because I have spent the last 2 weeks watching Voldemort's army grow stronger while our own defenses crumbled. Because I have seen what he does to prisoners, what he plans for the world he wants to create. And because," his voice broke slightly, "because I have realized that my fear of corruption, my determination to protect you from the mistakes I made, may have doomed us all." "What do you mean?" Ron asked. "I mean that in trying to prevent you from becoming monsters, I may have ensured that a monster will triumph." Dumbledore looked directly at Harry. "You asked me once why I didn't use the power I had gained from accessing the archive to fight Voldemort directly. I told you it was because the power had corrupted me, made me less human. Hadn't it?" "Yes, but Harry, the question I should have asked myself was not whether the power would change me, but whether the changes were worth the good I could accomplish. I chose to remain human rather than risk becoming something else, even if becoming something else might have saved thousands of lives." Hermione stepped forward. "Professor, are you saying you think we should use the compact?" "I am saying," Dumbledore replied carefully, "that I trust you to make that decision for yourselves, and if you choose to attempt it, I want to help you succeed." "How?" Neville asked. Dumbledore stood and moved to the maps on their wall, studying the locations they had marked. "The trials you're about to face were designed by the Founders themselves. They require not just courage and determination, but wisdom and understanding. I have spent 80 years studying Founder magic, learning its patterns and principles. I can guide you through the trials, help you avoid the pitfalls that might otherwise defeat you." "And in return?" Harry asked suspiciously. "In return, I get to watch 4 remarkable young people attempt something that I was never brave enough to try myself." Dumbledore's smile was sad but genuine. The chance to see whether love and friendship can succeed where individual ambition failed. Another explosion shook the castle, this one close enough that they could feel the heat through the walls. Time was running out. "All right," Harry said finally. "But Professor, if we do this, if we actually manage to activate the compact, you have to promise us something." "What?" "You have to promise that if we don't survive it, you'll make sure people understand why we made this choice. You'll make sure they know we weren't just throwing our lives away, that we were trying to save everyone." Dumbledore's eyes filled with tears. "I promise, Harry. But for what it's worth, I believe you're going to survive this. All of you. You have something that neither Voldemort nor I ever had." "What's that?" Hermione asked. "Each other," Dumbledore said simply. "The Founders created the compact to be used by people who understood that true power comes not from individual greatness, but from the strength of connection between those who love each other. You 5 represent everything that Hogwarts was meant to create." As they prepared to leave their sanctuary and face the trials that would determine the fate of the magical world, Harry felt something he hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. Hope. They had the knowledge they needed. They had allies they could trust. They had a plan that might actually work. And they had each other. Whatever the trials demanded of them, whatever sacrifices they might be required to make, they would face them together. The war had come to Hogwarts. The final battle was beginning, but for the first time, Harry believed they might actually win. Outside their sanctuary, the sounds of battle grew closer and more intense. Voldemort was coming, bringing death and darkness and the promise of a world where love was weakness and power was the only truth that mattered. But inside the room of requirement, 5 young people and 1 old man prepared to prove him wrong. The Founder's legacy was about to be claimed, and perhaps, just perhaps, that would be enough to change everything. Chapter 11. The Final Archive. The trial of Slytherin began in darkness. Harry stood alone in what appeared to be an endless void, his footsteps echoing in space that seemed to stretch beyond the boundaries of physical reality. The air around him was thick with the scent of old magic and older ambition, and he could feel something watching him from the shadows, between shadows. "So," a voice said from everywhere and nowhere, "another Gryffindor comes to claim what belongs to Slytherin." The voice was cultured, intelligent, tinged with the sort of aristocratic authority that Harry had learned to associate with old pure-blood families. But there was something else in it, too, a weariness that spoke of centuries of waiting, of watching lesser wizards fail where greater ones should have succeeded. "I'm not here to claim anything," Harry said, keeping his voice steady despite the oppressive weight of magical attention pressing down on him. "I'm here to earn something." Interesting distinction. The darkness around him began to shift and coalesce, forming the suggestion of a chamber that might have been Salazar Slytherin's private study. "Tell me, young Gryffindor, what do you know of ambition?" "I know that wanting something isn't the same as deserving it," Harry replied. "And I know that the cost of getting what you want is usually higher than you think it's going to be." A figure materialized from the shadows, tall, elegant, with the sharp features and pale complexion that Harry recognized from the handful of portraits that still existed of Salazar Slytherin. But this wasn't the corrupted caricature that later generations had made of him. This was the man as he had been before paranoia and fear had driven him from the school he had helped to build. "You speak as one who has been offered power before," Slytherin observed. "Tell me about those offers." Harry thought about the Sorting Hat's whispered temptations during his first year, about the piece of Voldemort's soul that had lived in his head for most of his life, about the dark knowledge he had gained access to through Hermione's discoveries in Ravenclaw's archive. "I've been offered the chance to be special," he said carefully, "to stand apart from and above other people, to use my abilities to get what I want, rather than what's right. And you refused these offers. Every time." Slytherin circled him slowly, studying him with eyes that seemed to see far more than they should. "Why?" "Because being special isn't the same as being important," Harry said. "Because standing above other people usually means stepping on them. Because getting what you want at the expense of what's right is just another way of becoming the thing you're fighting against. And yet you are here, seeking power that could remake the wizarding world, power that would certainly set you apart from and above your peers. How do you reconcile this contradiction?" Harry was quiet for a moment, thinking about Hermione's frightened determination, about Ron's quiet courage, about Luna's unwavering faith, and Neville's steady resolve. "I'm not seeking power for myself. I'm seeking it for them, for the people I love, for the people who deserve better than to live in fear." "Ah." Slytherin's expression shifted, becoming something that might almost have been approval. "And if using this power required you to become something other than human? If it transformed you into a being of pure magical force, capable of imposing your will on reality itself? Then I'd have to trust the people I love to keep me human," Harry said. "I'd have to believe that love is stronger than power, and that the connections between us are more important than what any of us can do individually. Even if those connections proved insufficient? Even if the power corrupted you despite their best efforts?" Harry thought about that for a long moment, imagining himself transformed by founder magic into something cold and distant and alien to everything he had once valued. Then I'd have to trust them to stop me, to do whatever it took to prevent me from becoming something that threatened innocent people. Slytherin stopped circling and faced him directly. You would accept death at the hands of those you love rather than live as a corrupted version of yourself? Yes, Harry said without hesitation. Because if I became something that needed to be stopped, then stopping me would be the last gift I could give them. The chamber around them began to fill with silver light, and Harry could feel something shifting in the magical atmosphere. Slytherin's expression had changed completely, the wariness and suspicion replaced by something that looked like profound relief. For 800 years, the founder said quietly, I have waited for someone who understood that true ambition is not the desire to be great, but the desire to be worthy of greatness. You have passed the trial, Harry Potter. The darkness dissolved entirely, revealing a simple altar on which rested a crystal fragment that pulsed with green light. But as Harry reached for it, Slytherin's voice stopped him. Understand what you are claiming, the founder warned. This fragment contains not just my power, but my failures, my paranoia, my fear, my willingness to abandon everything I had built rather than trust in the goodness of others. If you claim it, you claim the responsibility to be better than I was. Harry's hand closed around the crystal, and immediately he felt the full weight of Slytherin's legacy flooding into his consciousness. The founder's brilliant tactical mind, his understanding of power structures and human nature, his ability to see 12 moves ahead in any conflict, but also his capacity for suspicion, his tendency toward isolation, his fear that those closest to him would ultimately betray him. For a moment, Harry felt himself teetering on the edge of transformation. The Slytherin fragment offered him the ability to see enemies everywhere, to trust no one completely, to always assume the worst of people's motivations. It would make him safer, more prepared, more capable of protecting the people he cared about by expecting the worst from everyone else. But then he thought about Hermione's determined faith in other people's essential goodness, about Ron's willingness to forgive and trust despite being hurt, about Luna's absolute certainty that love was stronger than fear. And he chose to be better than his predecessor. The crystal settled into his consciousness like a piece of a puzzle finally finding its proper place. He could feel its power, its knowledge, its capabilities. But he could also feel its limitations, its warnings about the price of isolation and paranoia. When the trial chamber faded entirely, Harry found himself back in the room of requirement, where his friends were waiting with expressions of anxious concern. How long was I gone? He asked. About 10 minutes, Hermione replied, but her eyes were fixed on the green light that was now emanating faintly from his skin. Harry, you're glowing, he finished. I can feel it. The Slytherin fragment. It's part of me now. Did the others succeed? Luna asked. As if summoned by her words, Ron stumbled into the room, his red hair disheveled, and his eyes bright with the gold light that meant he had claimed Gryffindor's fragment. That was, he gasped, leaning against the doorframe for support. That was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. Godric made me relive every moment of cowardice I've ever shown, every time I've run away or given up or let fear make my decisions for me. But you passed, Neville said, appearing behind Ron with Hufflepuff's fragment, casting yellow light from somewhere deep within his chest. We all passed. I felt it when the magic recognized you as worthy. Luna drifted in last, looking serene despite the blue radiance that surrounded her like a gentle aura. Rowena was very kind, she reported. She mostly wanted to make sure I understood that wisdom isn't the same as intelligence, and that sometimes the wisest choice is to trust in things that can't be proven. They stood in a circle, the 4 representatives of the Founder's legacy, each carrying a fragment of the most powerful magical weapon ever created. Harry could feel the crystals resonating with each other, calling to be joined, eager to fulfill the purpose for which they had been created. "Are we ready?" Hermione asked quietly. Before anyone could answer, the walls around them shuddered, not from explosions this time, but from something else, a magical presence so powerful and so alien that it made the air itself recoil from its touch. "He's found us," Harry said, his scar burning with familiar pain. "Voldemort's here." The door to their sanctuary exploded inward, and through the smoking gap stepped the most terrifying figure Harry had ever seen. This wasn't the pale, snake-like creature that Voldemort had become in his pursuit of immortality. This was something worse, something that had absorbed so much dark magic that it barely seemed physical anymore. "My dear children," Voldemort said, his voice carrying undertones of power that made the room of requirement itself seem to flinch. "How thoughtful of you to gather my inheritance in one convenient location." His red eyes fixed on the founder fragments that each of them carried, and Harry could see hunger there that went beyond mere desire. This was the craving of someone who had spent decades seeking exactly what they now possessed. "You cannot have them," Hermione said, stepping forward with silver light blazing around her like armor. "They were never meant for you." Voldemort laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass mixed with screaming wind. "Meant for me? Child, I am the only wizard alive who has the power and knowledge to use them properly. You are children playing with forces beyond your comprehension." "We comprehend enough," Harry said, moving to stand beside Hermione. "We comprehend that you're a madman who's torn his own soul apart in pursuit of power. We comprehend that you've become everything the Founders created their weapon to destroy." "Have I?" Voldemort's expression became mockingly curious. "And what do you think I have become, young Potter?" "A cautionary tale," Ron said, joining them with his hand on his wand. "A mistake that needs to be corrected," Neville added. "A very sad man who forgot that magic is meant to connect us, not separate us," Luna said with genuine pity. Voldemort's facade of amusement cracked, revealing the rage underneath. "Enough! Give me the fragments, and I will make your deaths quick. Refuse, and I will spend years teaching you the true meaning of suffering." "There's a third option," Harry said quietly. "Which is?" "We use them." The four friends moved to stand in a square formation, each facing one of the cardinal directions, with the center of the room between them. This was the moment they had trained for, planned for, accepted the potential consequences of. But as Harry began to raise his fragment, Voldemort struck. The curse that hit Hermione wasn't one that Harry recognized, but its effect was immediately obvious. She screamed and collapsed, convulsing as dark magic tore through her magical defenses and began attacking her life force directly. "Hermione!" Harry dropped to his knees beside her, abandoning the formation to gather her into his arms. She was burning with fever, her skin pale, and her breathing rapid and shallow. "Foolish boy," Voldemort said conversationally. "Did you think I would allow you to activate a weapon that could destroy me?" Miss Granger was the key to your little plan. Without her connection to Ravenclaw's legacy, the other fragments are merely pretty baubles. Harry could feel Hermione dying in his arms. Whatever curse Voldemort had used, it was designed specifically to target someone who had been exposed to Founder magic. Her body was rejecting the Ravenclaw fragment, and the magical backlash was killing her. "Please," he whispered, holding her closer. "Don't leave me. We're supposed to get married, remember? We're supposed to have a future." Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment they were clear and focused. "Harry," she breathed. "The compact. You have to. Not without you. With me." She raised a trembling hand to touch his face. "I'm not going anywhere. Not really. The magic, it connects us now. Even if my body fails, part of me will always be with you." Harry felt something shift in his understanding. The Founders' Compact didn't require 4 separate people to activate it. It required 4 aspects of magical understanding: wisdom, courage, loyalty, and purified ambition. And if Hermione was dying, if the Ravenclaw fragment was becoming separated from her physical form, "Ron, Neville, Luna," he called, without taking his eyes from Hermione's face. "The formation. Now." They moved to their positions, understanding flickering in their eyes, as they realized what Harry intended. If Hermione couldn't physically participate in the ritual, then Harry would carry her fragment for her. He would become the conduit for both Slytherin's purified ambition and Ravenclaw's accumulated wisdom. "Impossible!" Voldemort snarled, raising his wand again. "No wizard can channel two founder legacies simultaneously. The magical stress will destroy you." "Then it will destroy me," Harry said simply. "But Hermione will live, and you will be stopped." He pressed his hand to Hermione's chest, feeling for the Ravenclaw fragment that was slowly separating from her failing body. The moment his fingers made contact with it, pain beyond description raced through his nervous system. It felt like being struck by lightning while drowning in molten silver, but it also felt like coming home. The Ravenclaw fragment settled into his consciousness alongside Slytherin's, and suddenly Harry could perceive magic in a way that no human ever had before. He could see the fundamental forces that shaped reality, could understand spells not just as effects but as principles, could feel the connection between all living things like a vast web of light and energy. "Now!" he shouted. Ron, Neville, and Luna raised their fragments in unison, and the room of requirement exploded into light. Not the harsh light of destruction, but the warm, welcoming glow of creation itself. The four founder legacies reached out to each other across the space between them, forming connections that transcended physical distance. Voldemort struck at them with everything he had, throwing curses that could have leveled buildings and hexes that could have rewritten reality. But the light of the Founders' Compact absorbed every attack, transforming dark magic into harmless radiance. "This is not possible," he screamed. "I am Lord Voldemort. I am immortal. I am—" "Alone," Harry said quietly. And that, more than any curse or magical weapon, was what finally destroyed Tom Riddle. The Founders' Compact was not designed to kill through force or overwhelming power. It was designed to heal, to restore, to reconnect what had been severed. When its light touched Voldemort, it didn't destroy his body or eliminate his magic. Instead, it began to repair the damage he had done to his own soul. For someone who had spent decades fragmenting his consciousness, avoiding the connections that made life meaningful, the sudden restoration of wholeness was agony beyond description. All the pain he had caused others came flooding back to him, all the love he had rejected, all the opportunities for connection he had scorned, all the humanity he had discarded in his pursuit of power. He had become a being that could not exist in the presence of wholeness. And so, when wholeness was restored to him, he simply stopped. There was no dramatic explosion, no final curse, no last-minute attempt at revenge. Tom Riddle looked at them with eyes that were suddenly, terrifyingly human, whispered, "I'm sorry," and crumbled into dust. The Founders' Compact completed its activation, sending waves of restorative magic throughout the castle and beyond. Harry could feel it reaching every battlefield where Death Eaters fought Order members, healing the wounded, strengthening the defenders, and offering redemption to those who were willing to accept it. And then the magic turned its attention to the four friends who had wielded it. Harry felt power beyond imagining flowing through him, changing him on levels so fundamental that he wasn't sure he would still be recognizably human when the process finished. But alongside that transformation, he felt Hermione's presence strengthening in his consciousness. The Ravenclaw fragment wasn't just residing in him, it was bringing her with it, weaving her essence so deeply into his own that they became something new together. When the light finally faded, Harry found himself still kneeling on the floor of the room of requirement. But everything had changed. He could perceive magic as easily as sight or sound. He could sense the emotional states of every person in the castle. He could feel the connections between all living things like a vast, beautiful web of light. And when he looked down, he saw Hermione stirring in his arms, her eyes opening to reveal depths of silver that matched his own. "Did it work?" she asked softly. "It worked," he replied, helping her sit up. "Voldemort is gone. The war is over. And we're—" He paused, trying to find words for what they had become. "Different," she finished, "but still us." Around them, their friends were beginning to recover from their own transformations. Ron's connection to Gryffindor magic had left him with an unshakable courage that radiated from him like warmth from a fire. Neville's bond with Hufflepuff had given him a presence that made everyone around him feel safe and valued. Luna's link to Ravenclaw had enhanced her already remarkable intuition to the point where she seemed to exist partially outside normal time and space. They were no longer entirely human, but they were still, fundamentally, themselves. "The others," Hermione said suddenly. "The people fighting throughout the castle. Are they—" "They're fine," Harry said, his enhanced senses allowing him to perceive the entire castle at once. "Better than fine. The Compact's magic reached all of them. The wounded are healed. The Death Eaters who were willing to surrender have been offered redemption, and those who refused—" He paused. "Let's just say that Voldemort wasn't the only one who couldn't survive contact with restored wholeness." They helped each other stand, moving carefully as they adjusted to their new capabilities. The room of requirement had returned to its normal configuration, but Harry could sense that it was somehow more real now, more permanent. The magic they had wielded had stabilized it, making it a true sanctuary rather than a temporary creation. "What happens now?" Ron asked. It was a good question. They had saved the wizarding world, but in doing so they had fundamentally changed both themselves and the magical community. They would need to learn how to live as something more than human. They would need to help others understand what had happened and what it meant for the future. But before any of that, Harry had a promise to keep. He turned to Hermione, taking her hands in his, and feeling the way their newly enhanced magic sang in harmony. "We're still getting married," he said firmly. "I don't care if we're not entirely human anymore. I don't care if we have to figure out how to plan a wedding for people who glow with founder magic. The answer is still yes, right?" Hermione laughed, and the sound was like silver bells and summer rain and everything beautiful in the world. "The answer is still yes," she confirmed, "though we might want to discuss what kind of honeymoon is appropriate for people who can perceive the fundamental forces of reality." "Somewhere quiet," Luna suggested helpfully. "Reality can be very loud when you're not used to hearing it properly." As they made their way from the room of requirement toward the rest of the castle, Harry reflected on everything that had led to this moment. The discovery of Hermione's heritage, the access to forbidden knowledge, the trials and sacrifices, and impossible choices. They had lost their humanity, but gained something that might be even more valuable, the ability to ensure that love and connection would always triumph over fear and isolation. They had become guardians of the magical world, protectors whose very existence would prevent future Dark Lords from rising. It wasn't the future they had planned for themselves, but as Harry felt Hermione's hand in his and sensed the contentment radiating from their friends, he realized it was the future they had chosen. They had saved the world through love and sacrifice and the willingness to become something greater than themselves. And perhaps that was the most powerful magic of all. Outside the castle, dawn was breaking over a world that was finally, truly, at peace. The war was over. The darkness had been defeated. And in the depths of Hogwarts, 5 young people who were no longer entirely young and no longer entirely people prepared to build the future they had just made possible. The Founder's legacy lived on, and it was in very good hands. Chapter 12. After the Eagle's flight, the hospital wing had never been so quiet. Harry sat in the chair beside Hermione's bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, while morning light streamed through windows that no longer needed to be warded against attack. 3 days had passed since the activation of the Founder's Compact, 3 days since Voldemort's final defeat, and the wizarding world was still struggling to understand what peace felt like. But Harry's attention was focused entirely on the girls sleeping in the bed before him, on the subtle changes that their shared transformation had wrought. Hermione's hair caught the sunlight differently now, as if each strand were woven through with silver thread. Her skin had a faint luminescence that became more pronounced when she was using magic, and when her eyes were open, they held depths that seemed to reflect centuries of accumulated wisdom. She was beautiful. She was powerful. And she was fundamentally different from the girl he had fallen in love with 6 months earlier. The question that had been keeping him awake for 3 straight nights was whether she was still Hermione Granger, underneath all that founder magic, or whether he had lost her to something larger and more ancient than their love could withstand. "You're thinking very loudly," she said softly, her eyes still closed. "I can feel your worry from here." Harry started, then smiled despite his exhaustion. "Sorry. I didn't realize you were awake. I've been drifting in and out for the past hour." She opened her eyes, and Harry felt his breath catch as he saw the silver light swirling in their brown depths. "Harry, you look terrible. When was the last time you slept?" "I've been sleeping," he said defensively. "Right here, in this chair." Hermione sat up carefully, wincing slightly as she adjusted to her new magical equilibrium. "That's not sleeping, that's keeping vigil. You can't stay by my bedside forever, you know." "Why not?" The question came out more desperate than he had intended, revealing fears he hadn't meant to voice. Hermione's expression softened, and she reached for his hand. "Because I'm not going anywhere," she said gently. "Harry, I know what you're afraid of. I can feel it through our connection. You're worried that the transformation changed me too much, that I'm more Rowena Ravenclaw than Hermione Granger now." Harry couldn't deny it. Ever since the compact had woven their magic together, he had been able to sense the vast knowledge and ancient wisdom that now resided in Hermione's consciousness. Sometimes, when she looked at him, he could see centuries of accumulated experience reflected in her eyes. Sometimes, when she spoke, her words carried undertones of authority that belonged to a founder of Hogwarts rather than a 17-year-old girl. "Haven't you changed?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she admitted. "I have access to memories and knowledge that span nearly 1,000 years. I understand magic in ways that no living witch has understood it since the time of the founders. I can perceive connections between spells and theories that previous generations could only dream of grasping." Harry felt his heart sink. "So you're not—" "I'm still me, Harry." She squeezed his hand, and he could feel the familiar warmth that had nothing to do with founder magic. All of that knowledge, all of those memories, they're additions to who I already was, not replacements. I'm Hermione Granger, who happens to carry Rowena Ravenclaw's legacy, not Rowena Ravenclaw, who happens to look like Hermione." "How can you be sure?" Hermione smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the girl who had corrected his pronunciation of Leviosa in their first year. "Because I still think you're an idiot for not sleeping properly. Because I still want to finish our NEWTS, even though we probably don't need formal magical education anymore. Because when I think about our future, I don't see myself reshaping the wizarding world according to some grand vision. I see myself curled up with you in front of a fire, reading books and arguing about transfiguration theory." Harry felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. "That does sound like you." "It is me. Just more me than I used to be." She gestured toward the window, where they could see students beginning to return to the castle as word of the war's end spread throughout the wizarding world. "Harry, we saved everyone. We ended a war that could have destroyed everything we care about. But we did it as ourselves, not as vessels for ancient powers." Before Harry could respond, the infirmary doors opened to admit Ron, Neville, and Luna. All 3 of them showed signs of their own transformation. Ron carried himself with a new confidence that spoke of unshakable courage. Neville radiated a calm authority that made everyone around him feel safe, and Luna seemed to exist partially outside normal time and space, as if she were seeing slightly into the future. "Good, you're awake," Ron said, settling into one of the chairs that had been conjured around Hermione's bed. "Madame Pomfrey said you've been refusing to leave the hospital wing for 3 days." "I've been keeping Hermione company," Harry replied. "You've been driving yourself mad with worry," Neville corrected gently. "We can all feel it through the founder connections. Your anxiety is affecting the magical atmosphere of the entire castle." Harry looked around at his friends, noting the way they all seemed more real somehow, more present in the world. The transformation had changed them all, but like Hermione, they remained fundamentally themselves. "How are you handling it?" he asked. "The changes, I mean. The new abilities and knowledge and everything." "It's strange," Ron admitted. "Sometimes I know things that I shouldn't know. Battle strategies and tactical theories that Godric Gryffindor developed centuries ago. But it doesn't feel foreign. It feels like remembering something I'd forgotten." "For me, it's more like having a very wise grandmother living in the back of my mind," Neville said. "Helga's memories don't overwhelm my own thoughts, but they're there when I need guidance or perspective." "Rowena mostly just makes helpful suggestions," Luna added cheerfully, "though she does get rather insistent about proper research methodology." Hermione laughed, and Harry felt his last lingering fears finally beginning to fade. Whatever they had become, they were still the same people who had chosen to risk everything for each other and for the wizarding world. "What's the situation outside?" Hermione asked. "How is everyone handling, well, everything?" "Better than expected," Ron replied. "The Ministry is in chaos, obviously, trying to figure out how to govern a world where the war is suddenly over and most of the Death Eaters are either dead or begging for forgiveness. But people are celebrating. There are parties in the streets, families reuniting, children coming out of hiding. And the people who fought beside us? Recovering," Neville said. "The Compact's magic healed everyone who was injured in the final battle, but it's going to take time for people to process what happened. A lot of the Order members are still trying to understand how 4 teenagers managed to end a war that they'd been fighting for years." "With help," Harry said firmly. "We couldn't have done any of it without the information Sirius gathered, or the protection Professor McGonagall provided, or the research resources that Luna's father compiled." "Speaking of professors," Luna said, "Dumbledore asked us to let him know when you were feeling well enough for visitors. He has something he wants to discuss with all of us." Harry and Hermione exchanged glances. Their relationship with Dumbledore remained complicated, marked by the confrontations and broken trust that had preceded their final victory. "I suppose we should get it over with," Hermione said, sitting up straighter in her bed. 10 minutes later, Dumbledore entered the infirmary looking older and more fragile than any of them had ever seen him. The events of the past few days had clearly taken their toll on the ancient headmaster, but there was something different in his bearing, a humility that had been absent during their previous encounters. "Harry, Hermione," he said quietly, "I hope you are feeling better." "We're fine, Professor," Harry replied carefully. "What did you want to discuss?" Dumbledore conjured a chair and sat down slowly, his blue eyes taking in the subtle changes that marked them all as something more than human. "I wanted to apologize," he said simply, "and I wanted to thank you." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with months of conflict and misunderstanding. "Apologize for what, specifically?" Hermione asked. "For allowing my fear to override my judgment, for trying to control your choices rather than trusting in your wisdom, for believing that my experience gave me the right to make decisions about your lives and your magical development." Dumbledore's voice was heavy with regret. "I spent so many years trying to prevent the creation of another Dark Lord that I nearly prevented the creation of the very heroes we needed to defeat the one we had." "And what are you thanking us for?" Harry asked. "For proving me wrong. for showing that power and knowledge can be wielded wisely when they are shared among those who love each other, for demonstrating that the corruption I feared was not inevitable, but rather the result of isolation and pride. Dumbledore smiled sadly. You succeeded where I failed, not despite your youth and inexperience, but because of your willingness to trust each other completely. Hermione leaned forward. Professor, what happens now? To the school? To the wizarding world? To us? That, Dumbledore said, depends entirely on what you want to happen. You four are the most powerful magical beings in Britain, possibly in the world. You could reshape society according to your vision, establish yourselves as leaders, take control of the ministry, and implement whatever changes you believe are necessary. But, Ron asked, sensing there was more to the headmaster's statement. But I hope you won't, Dumbledore said simply. I hope you will choose to remain students, to finish your education, to build lives based on love and connection rather than power and authority. That's exactly what we plan to do, Luna said matter-of-factly, though we might need some adjustments to our coursework, given our new capabilities. Dumbledore's smile became genuinely warm for the first time in months. I believe arrangements can be made. The Founder's knowledge that you now carry includes advanced magical theories that go far beyond anything in our standard curriculum. They spent the next hour discussing practical matters, how to complete their education while integrating their new abilities, how to help other students adjust to a post-war wizarding world, how to ensure that the knowledge they had gained would be preserved and protected for future generations. But underlying all these conversations was a deeper question about what kind of people they wanted to become now that they had the power to become anything. There's something else we need to discuss, Hermione said, as the conversation wound down. The archive, Ravenclaw's research, the Founder knowledge, all of it. What happens to it now? Dumbledore's expression became serious. What do you think should happen to it? I think it should remain sealed, Harry said without hesitation. Not because the knowledge is inherently dangerous, but because it should only be accessed by people who are ready for the responsibility it brings. And how would you determine readiness? The same way the Founders did, Hermione replied, through trials that test wisdom, courage, loyalty, and the ability to desire greatness for the right reasons. The knowledge exists for a purpose, to defend against threats that conventional magic cannot handle. It should remain available for that purpose, but protected from those who would misuse it. You would become its guardians, Dumbledore said, understanding. We already are its guardians, Neville pointed out. The question is how we want to handle that responsibility. They agreed that the archive would remain sealed, accessible only through the trials that they themselves had faced. But unlike the previous generation of guardians, they would work together rather than allowing fear and isolation to drive them apart. After Dumbledore left, the five friends sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over grounds that were slowly returning to normal. Students were trickling back to the castle, families were reuniting, and the magical world was beginning to heal from years of war and division. I have something to ask, all of you, Harry said suddenly. Hermione and I, we want to get married, soon, before we graduate, before we figure out what we're going to do with the rest of our lives. We want to start our future together as soon as possible. About time, Ron said with a grin. I was starting to think you were going to dance around each other forever. We'd like you to be part of it, Hermione added. Not just as guests, but as family. The family we chose for ourselves. Luna clapped her hands together delightedly. Oh, how wonderful. I do love weddings. When were you thinking? Next month, Harry said. Small ceremony, just the people who matter most to us. Here at Hogwarts, Neville asked. In the room of requirement, Hermione confirmed. The place where we planned our future, where we made the decisions that brought us here. It seems appropriate. Over the following weeks, as the wizarding world slowly adjusted to peace, and the castle filled once again with students, Harry and Hermione found themselves navigating a new kind of normal. Their enhanced abilities required careful management. They had to learn to moderate the founder magic that flowed through them, to integrate ancient knowledge with teenage concerns, to balance their responsibilities as guardians with their desire to simply be students in love. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes Hermione would become so absorbed in researching advanced magical theories that she forgot to eat or sleep. Sometimes Harry would sense threats that didn't exist, his protective instincts heightened by his connection to founder magic. Sometimes they would both struggle with the weight of knowledge they couldn't share, responsibilities they couldn't fully explain. But they learned to anchor each other, to remind each other of who they were underneath all the magic and responsibility. And slowly they began to build the life they had dreamed of during the darkest moments of the war. The wedding took place on a perfect spring evening in a room of requirement that had transformed itself into something between a garden and a cathedral. Soft light filtered through what appeared to be crystal windows, and flowers that had never existed in the natural world bloomed along the walls. Professor McGonagall officiated, her usually stern expression softened by genuine joy for her students. Hermione wore robes that seemed to be woven from moonlight and starfire, while Harry's formal robes carried subtle embroidery that honored both their founder connections and their Hogwarts house loyalties. Ron, Neville, and Luna stood with them as witnesses, their own magical auras creating a soft harmony of colored light. "The bonds you forged today," McGonagall said, as they exchanged rings that had been crafted from crystals containing traces of the founder fragments, "are not merely personal promises, but magical connections that will endure beyond the boundaries of a single lifetime." When they kissed, sealing their vows, the room of requirement filled with gentle radiance that seemed to bless not just their union, but their commitment to use their power in service of love and protection. The celebration afterward was small but perfect. Their closest friends, a handful of teachers who had supported them, and Sirius and Lupin, who had travelled from London to see Harry married. There was dancing and laughter, and the kind of joy that comes from surviving something terrible together. But the moment Harry treasured most came late in the evening, when he and Hermione slipped away from the party to walk the grounds they had helped to save. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the castle glowed with warm light that spoke of safety and home. "Any regrets?" he asked, taking her hand as they wandered toward the lake. "About which part? Marrying you, saving the world, or becoming something that's not entirely human?" "Any of it. All of it." Hermione was quiet for a moment, considering. "I regret that we had to grow up so fast. I regret that we never got to be normal teenagers worrying about normal things. I regret that we lost people along the way, and that the choices we made came with prices we couldn't have anticipated. But I don't regret falling in love with you. I don't regret choosing to fight rather than hiding. I don't regret becoming someone who can protect the people I care about." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "Harry, we saved everyone. We ended a war. We prevented countless deaths. We gave children the chance to grow up in a world without fear. How could I regret that? Even though we're not really human anymore." "Are we not?" Hermione asked with a smile. "We still laugh and cry and worry about our friends. We still get excited about learning new things and frustrated when spell work doesn't go according to plan. We still fall asleep in each other's arms and wake up grateful to be together. What part of that isn't human?" Harry considered this. "The part where we glow with founder magic and can sense the emotional state of everyone in the castle and have access to 1,000 years of accumulated knowledge. Those are additions to our humanity, not replacements for it. We're still who we were, Harry. We're just more." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the peace that had been so hard won and the simple pleasure of being together without crisis or danger pressing at them. Eventually they found themselves back at the entrance to the castle, looking up at the towers that had sheltered them through 7 years of magical education and one final, desperate gamble. "What do you think happens next?" Harry asked. "We finish our NEWTs, though I suspect our examiners are going to be somewhat confused by the level of magic we're capable of now," Hermione replied. "We figure out what kind of careers are appropriate for people with founder-level magical abilities. We learn how to be married to each other while also being guardians of ancient knowledge. We have children eventually, and teach them that power is a responsibility, not a privilege. Sounds like a good life." "It sounds like our life," she corrected. "The one we chose, the one we earned, the one we're going to build together." As they climbed the steps to return to their celebration, Harry reflected on everything that had brought them to this moment. The discovery in the Black family archives that had started it all, the access to forbidden knowledge that had changed them forever, the trials and sacrifices and impossible choices that had culminated in their transformation into something more than human. It hadn't been the path they had expected their lives to take, but as he felt Hermione's hand in his and sensed the contentment radiating from their friends, he realized it was exactly the path they were meant to walk. They had saved the wizarding world through love and sacrifice and the willingness to become something greater than themselves. They had proven that power could be wielded wisely when it was shared among those who trusted each other completely. They had chosen connection over isolation, wisdom over knowledge, and love over fear. And now they got to live with the consequences of those choices, not as a burden, but as a gift. The war was over. The future was theirs to build, and they would build it together, as they had chosen to face everything else together. In the years to come, people would tell stories about the night 4 teenagers saved the wizarding world by activating a weapon their enemies couldn't have imagined and wouldn't have dared to use. They would speak of the love that proved stronger than death, the friendship that transcended individual ambition, and the wisdom that chose restraint over domination. But for Harry and Hermione Potter, walking hand in hand through the castle that had been their home and their refuge and their battleground, the story was simpler than that. They had found each other. They had chosen each other. And they would continue choosing each other every day for the rest of their lives, however long those lives might be, and whatever form they might take. The Founder's legacy lived on. Not in the archive they guarded or the power they wielded, but in the love they shared and the future they were determined to build together. And perhaps that was the most powerful magic of all. As they rejoined their wedding celebration, the room of requirement glowing softly around them, and their friends' laughter echoing off the walls, Harry Potter and Hermione Potter looked toward a future that was no longer overshadowed by war or darkness or fear. They had earned their happiness. They had paid for their power with sacrifice and wisdom and the willingness to be better than their predecessors. And now, finally, they were free to simply be young and in love and hopeful about tomorrow. The eagle had taken flight, carrying them beyond the boundaries of what they had thought possible, and they were ready to soar